Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee McKenna. I'm a therapist and shamanic healer and a parent, and I'm here for part 5 of our spiritual parenting series with Shawn Murphy, who's a spiritual consultant, also a parent and author of the 4-part book series, Torn Between Two Worlds. And today we're going to talk about valuing success and failure. Shawn, always nice to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here again today, Renee, and this is sort of a continuation from our last discussion about setting high expectations and letting go of the outcome.
Yes, that's 4. So talk a little bit about valuing success and failure.
Well, part of that is, I've had this problem in relation to my daughter as she was growing up. What I thought was a success, she didn't think was a success. So the first thing is understanding, what our children are measuring themselves against, and not reacting immediately to say, "Oh, you did so well." I learned to say, "How did you do on that? How did you think you did?" And not to judge what their success or failure was. I've been surprised a number of times when I thought it was a failure, and turned out she was really proud of herself that she had accomplished what she accomplished. So that's kind of the first part of the question is setting that value system up between yourself and your child, and understanding, like I said from the last time, what was their expectation going into this event, whatever it was.
Well, I know for myself, I've actually moved off of the success failure continuum and onto more of just the life experience paradigm, where everything's an experience, and things that the culture at large might call success can often be painful and difficult, and things that might be considered a failure may be a left turn in our life path that's really beneficial in the long run. So I've moved away from that outward approach of success and failure myself for those reasons. And I think about how I used to instruct the parents of my students when I was an art teacher for 13 years. And I handed out a little sheet that I came across of how to talk to your children about art. And one of the first things I would have to try to wring out of my children, and it would happen as early as kindergarten, is they would say, "Is this good, Miss McKenna? Is this good?" And they wanted to be good. And good is not art, right? It's somebody's idea. And being creative and expressing yourself and actually going out, particularly in art, going outside the box, doing unexpected things, making purple trees, or trees that are upside down, or things that look differently as they move through our own expression. And a lot of parents are on this kind of success failure, wanting their children to make and be and do good, based on some limited perspective on what good is. And depending on your perspective, it can be many different things. And so, like you kind of pointed to, one of the things was to ask children questions about their work and how they felt about it, or to describe what was happening there, rather than asking, "What did you make?" or "What is that?" To ask them more about the process rather than the product. And I found that approach in life in general, of the process rather than the product, has been much deeper and richer and less judgmental for myself and toward others, because life is a windy path and we never know where things are going to bring us. And also, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, the character building that happens in not getting what we want, or things working out differently than we might expect, or not being able to please everyone, to be more aware of our own experience rather than other people's experience of us, because most of us are raised to be pleasers of others. That's how our whole school system is set up, is to please the teacher, whoever they might happen to be, rather than to live from a place of your own integrity or your own inspiration, or what's important to you, or at least even to consider that in the equation is a whole different paradigm.
Well, thank you for that. I think one thing that we do need to keep in mind is that children do judge themselves on success and failure. So a parent has only one input into that equation. So they're going to have other children in school who are going to judge against each other. And so we knew it's nice to take the higher road, but the kids are often at a lower road sometimes. And giving our children tools to work with to help them navigate their performance relative to other children is, I think, important too.
Right. So comparing, in fact, I did my podcast this week on the comparing yourself to yourself rather than to others. And it's interesting. So I notice, again, in my primary work when the schools is with art, although I also have a lot to say about play and all of the structured sports and even structured play that we have now, that doesn't just allow children to just do stuff that may not even be competitive. A lot of times they're just playing and having fun, and we make it win-lose hierarchy with sports teams and stuff, that everything becomes based on that perspective rather than on cooperation or just enjoying yourself and having fun. It becomes competitive, and that's kind of instructed into us. But I know that the children that struggled the most with art were the ones who had the most self-judgment. They weren't comparing themselves to other people. Nothing they did that they felt was good enough. And they would, there was almost a demographic of it. I could see them. They were usually boys, and they would sit at the end of the table, and they would have, as soon as art class came, they would get really depressed. And because they were being asked to just do something and have fun, and they actually didn't know how to do that. It was really excruciating for them. When we could get them into a creative place, it was often really potent what they would produce for me as an artist, as an art teacher, but they would never believe it themselves because they were so really, and I would love to hear some of your suggestions and tools to give kids, trying to help them. I mean, this is a lot of what I do in my spiritual psychology work, is to try to help people shift their inner dialogue and their inner relationship with themselves from one of judgment and being punitive into one that's more loving and kind and compassionate. That's a really interesting thing when people are in what's perceived as failure or not getting what they want or pleasing other people, and how to navigate that, to be able to try something else or use it as a learning experience, or use it as a directive rather than as a judgment of their character or worth or value as a person.
Okay. One of the things that was the most powerful for my relationship with my daughter was talking about my failures, and very openly and honestly talking about the things that didn't work out for me, and what I learned from that, and how I had to change in order to adapt to a different situation.
Mhm.
And the reason I say it is the most important because, up until that point, my daughter and my wife, for that matter, put me on a pedestal. And a lot of kids do that, mommy and daddy can't do wrong. It's me that's doing the things wrong and that aren't making mommy and daddy happy. And if you can break down that barrier, it helps them to look at other children in the same way, to say that, that's the brainiac over there. Well, maybe they're good at one or two things, but they have weaknesses too. They're not invincible. And by creating somebody invincible in your life, you're devaluing yourself.
Mm.
You know, saying somebody does no wrong, you're making yourself, your self-worth is going down. So that, as I said, had the biggest impact on my relationship with my daughter.
Right, just bringing your own humanity. I think age appropriately sharing our all of who we are with our children is really, really helpful. It demonstrates vulnerability and authentic communication, and and I think it breeds some of that resilience of demonstrated resilience, um, and and just humanity. Right, these things we're good at, these things we're not good at, and I think about my son who's on the special needs spectrum, I suppose you would say. And we pulled him out of the kind of traditional Catholic school that he was in, that my daughter flourished in, but it was a really bad system for him. It was just too limited. And we got him into a special school for unique learners, and he thrived there. And we talked a lot about that experience, certainly not as a failure, but as really finding your place. And I like the phrase that there's a wrench for every nut. And I know for myself, I didn't really find, I'm a late bloomer. I didn't find even the beginning of my place in the world until I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't discover my work from a vocational standpoint until I was in my late 30s. And so being willing to experiment and and take time and take things as directives. My children both did very well in school, and I always did very well in school. But I have to say, it was interesting you were talking about at the beginning, the idea of what is success for the child. And I didn't really care about getting A's. It felt meaningless to me. I recognized for myself pretty early that this was this was about figuring out what the teacher wanted, giving it to them, and I was good at that. And so it didn't make me feel good about myself necessarily. It didn't shift the deeper needs or connections that I had by being like outwardly successful in some of these external ways. And it was discovering the things that were meaningful to me. Again, much later in my life was when I really had a sense of success, which was, Tony Robbins says what makes us happy is not the acquisition of power or money or prestige or relationships or items. What makes us happy is progress. And I think that that's really true. And being able to help our children, I mean, we've kind of talked about this in some of our other conversations. I think helping children to with the idea of progress rather than perfection, and the value of that, and how to value it is an interesting idea. How do we value failure?
Yes. I want to touch on a point that both you and I have talked about, and that is, you just said that you found, the right school for your son. I jumped through hoops to find the right place for my daughter, but there's so many people who don't have that opportunity to do what we did, and you made a very good point there, and this is what I wrote in my book also, is helping your child to find the right wrench. If it's a coach, if it's a minister, if it's the librarian, or whoever it is, helping them find a person who can understand them and to help them find their self-worth. It doesn't have to be a school. I've seen it with my nephews, that they found, the wrestling coach, or, they found somebody who took them under their wing and showed them what their value is.
Mhm.
So I think as a parent, some parents have more means than others, but we all have the means to open up our mind to our children and try and find the best thing for them. And it can be just a relationship
Right.
that's different than the one I have with my child.
I'm thinking about this wonderful book. I'm actually seeing if I can find the author of it. I think it's called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. Let me
No.
see who the author is. It's a wonderful book by Wendy Mogul. And she talks about difficulty as a teacher, and that a lot of us want to protect our children from difficulty, that we think loving them is keeping them comfortable and protecting them from suffering. And really, what we're doing is we're making them afraid of being hurt and undermining the resources that we have for resilience, for healing, for survival that are way beyond what we have the capacity to understand. My son took a gap year between high school and college, and it was during COVID anyway, so college was kind of stupid at some point. And he went on an outward bound trek in the Sierra Nevada, and they hiked 180 miles in 30 days. And there was one boy, young man, who didn't make it. He hated it the very first day. He said, I'm not doing this. And he sat down, and they said they had never had anybody do that before. They had to reroute the whole trip so they could get this kid out of there because he just wouldn't participate. And they had to carry heavy packs. They cooked all kinds of not very good food. And the one thing my son said to me was, I had no idea that I was that strong. I had no idea that I could do something that hard. And it was really life-changing for him. And the blessing of a skinned knee is to recognize that you can fall down and scrape your knee and your body will heal itself. You're okay. It's fine. Put a Band-Aid on it, get back up, go back into the playground. I think I know for myself, I had a very sick and weakly mother who believed that keeping comfortable was love. And so I was allowed to stay home from school whenever I had a little anxiety or a tummy ache. In fact, I missed enough school my senior year in high school that I almost wasn't allowed to graduate. And it wasn't until I was a grown-up. She thought that she was loving me, but what ended up happening was that my wings were clipped. They never developed the strength that they needed until much later. It cost me a lot of money in therapy, actually, to develop those skills, to be able to show up and do things that are hard and build the resilience and faith in the process that it's okay if things go different ways than we think, or we get hurt a little bit, they actually make us stronger, like playing in the dirt and with dogs and cats builds our immune system rather than making us sick. Yeah.
Yes, that is very true. The balance between trying to protect your child and trying to support your child is very difficult to meet. We took the approach that we would be there to help her up after she fell, but not to prevent her from falling. And I think that's a healthy thing to do, but for many people, they don't think about the consequences of stopping them from falling down.
Mhm.
Because that failure or that experience, it builds strengths. Although, putting my hand in a pan of boiling water ensured that I never did that again, but it was a long time in the hospital for me to learn that.
Well, but we do survive those things. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
all kinds of, we don't, that's not a hazing experience we encourage all children to do. But having trust, and actually, I think as parents, one of the biggest challenges is actually to be able to recognize some of our own selfishness in relation to our children's suffering. That we need to be willing to suffer along with our children. And some of the protection that we offer them, or the fear that we have around them, is actually our own fear projected onto them of their experience, rather than allowing them to have an experience and us not protecting them from that because we don't want to have bad feelings. We don't want to have sadness or suffering or anxiety around their experience. And so I know across the board, actually, in relationship, that's a place that almost all of us need to grow, is in recognizing or being willing to tolerate our own discomfort for another person's life experience or spiritual growth.
Well, you know, if you talk to any entrepreneur, they'll tell you how many times that they failed before they succeeded. And you know, the wise men of the world will tell you that if you don't learn from your failures, then it's a mistake. But if you learn from your failures, it's experience.
It's practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I mean,
that's the concept of valuing failures. You don't want to keep making the same mistake your whole life. You want to move forward and learn from your mistakes, and do it better the next time.
which is the idea of, can we enjoy the process and not take ourselves so seriously? You know, I think about, there was a boy, a dear friend of mine, we lived in a duplex, and her 9-year-old son became obsessed with basketball. And the basketball hoop was right next to my bedroom, so I got to hear the ding, 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 ding all the time, right? And you know, if his missed baskets were failures, then he wouldn't have become as good of a basketball player as he ultimately became, right? He had to shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of times to be able to, you know, it's like the famous thing with Edison with the light bulb. Were those failures? No, they're learning. They really are learning experiences. I think that's, for me, the downside of looking at things as success and failure rather than experience and learning, is that if we're just looking to succeed, we won't take risks, we won't be creative, and we'll see failures as something to be hidden or be ashamed of, rather than, again, as a learning experience of like, oh, I'm shooting, it's not going in. I got to do it a different way to be able to make the light bulb light up or get it in the basket.
Yes, yeah. Sir Ken Robinson talks a lot about creativity and the importance of failure. And if we inhibit failures in our children, that we stifle their creativity.
Well, unfortunately, our education system doesn't encourage failure, and it doesn't encourage creativity. It really encourages perfectionism and just doing the right thing. You get punished, in fact, if you make mistakes, because you get worse grades. And I think that it is a lack of wisdom, and this idea of learning from our experience is perhaps one of the most important things that we do. One of my favorite recent quotes that I saw was, if you're good at everything you're doing in your life, then you're not taking enough risks. Right? And so I know for myself, just in my own life, I'm in a continual practice, actually, of doing things that are outside my comfort zone that I'm not very good at. And that is, it's really an excellent ego exercise. And we expect that from our kids, because we have them try all kinds of things usually when they're little. They get to try baseball and ballet, and they have to do drawing and math and reading and all science and all that stuff to experiment and find the things that resonate for them, and to be able to let go of the things that don't. it is a challenge.
Yes, it is. And unfortunately, the many school systems, don't allow kids to specialize as early as they want to. I've tried that. I want to specialize in a creative area instead of an analytical area, for instance. So, I mean, that's what we did with our daughters, took her out of that system that inhibited her creative growth, and let her focus on what she's good at.
How are the schools in Switzerland? Do you know how they navigate that? You might know.
Well, traditionally, the Swiss schools were set up with 3 paths, which fork out at age 10 or 12.
Mhm.
So yes, you can become a journeyman electrician or machine operator at a young age if you focus on that a technical profession, or you can go into a professional area, accounting or banking or that sort of thing fairly early. And the brainiacs could leave the general population fairly young and just focus on academics. That system's in place here, but and it's a very good system. But unfortunately, parents are pushing too many kids to go into the university path and the brainiac path, and not everybody is academically talented.
No, and in America, you don't have to be in $500,000 of debt either if you don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, the universities in Switzerland are among the best in the world, because of that early specialization.
Right, because it really separates out the.
Yeah, which doesn't mean, I mean, people who are going on to be in business and so forth don't need to have a PhD necessarily. They can, but if they have the capacity to have a PhD, then great, go do it.
So, any particular tools you would leave people with in how to value failure as well as success?
Well, what I said in the beginning is the one that I saw was most effective is to share experiences with your child of failure and talk about their expectations for the various things that they do. I mean, and certainly in any competitive sport, there's going to be winners or losers, but how do you feel about that? I mean, you have no control over a runner who's taller, faster than you are. You can't beat them. But how do you feel about your personal input that you put into it? How hard did you work on it? So there are things that you can't control, like I said, and beating somebody who's much, much better than you. And sharing our personal experiences on not living up to our own expectations is an important thing to help break down some of the barriers that children have, thinking people are giants or brainiacs or whatever they are. They're of a different class than I am, and helping our children to discover their superpower is the role of a parent, I think. Find out what they're good at and help them to develop that superpower, whatever it is.
Beautiful. And so I hope you'll join us for session number 6. We're going to talk about allowing obstacles to become opportunities in our series on spiritual parenting. Shawn, always lovely to talk with you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Renee. It's a beautiful relationship that we've been building up here, and I'm looking forward to finishing our discussion about raising spiritual children.
Mm.